I almost didn't recognize young Gol Letugel when I saw him, crouched over his drink like a common drunkard, staring into his glass with unseeing eyes, like a man who had been utterly defeated by life. "By the Emperor, man, what happened?" I asked. He looked up and saw me. "Ah, Mul Legul. Sit with me, my friend." "Seriously, what happened?" I repeated as I did so. Letugel seemed to struggle for words. How do I explain this in a way where I don't sound like a madman? I suppose I could start with yes. Keeping in mind that the only thing special about him was how well he was able to articulate his case, being apparently well read on the matter. Let me tell you about a man named Jacob Schmidt. Schmidt was part of a further cell. Remind me, are further terrorists, or are they guerrillas we don't like terrorists? All factions of the Human Liberation Organization were classified as terrorists, no matter their particular tactics and strategy. Middle of the road. They don't deliberately target civilians, but they do target civilian infrastructure, on the logic that ships carrying aid don't have as much cargo space to carry weapons, and any resources we spend repairing fusion plants aren't being used to make them. Anyway, Schmidt's cell was caught in New York City, attempting to blow up a police station, and I was assigned the task of interrogating him. When he stood up to torture, I began to hope that he actually had useful information, and decided to use drugs on him. But of course he didn't. Human terrorist networks operate in decentralized cells for this exact reason. He did confess to being responsible for the assassination of a prominent human collaborator and comprador, however, so I suppose I got to mark that one as solved on account of it, for what it's worth. "By the Emperor's asshole, boy, why were you so tight-lipped when you knew absolutely nothing I couldn't have inferred?" I demanded. "Waste your time, waste your resources." Schmidt, who still had the drug coursing through his veins, answered. "Did you seriously subject yourself to hours of torture, just to make me waste a few credits worth of truth drug?" I demanded. "Ooh, credits. Plural. Nice," Schmidt replied. And then, out of exasperation, and because he was a dead man walking anyway, so it didn't matter, I asked a question I didn't actually expect an answer to. "Why can't we break you?" "Why do you care? You'll kill me anyway." "No, I mean you in general. Humanity. Why can't we break humanity?" Schmidt looked at me like I said something incomprehensible. "You break humans all the time. Then why don't you stay broken?" Letugel slammed his fist against the bar as he said this, with all the fury he must have felt back then. Then, remembering that he was telling a story, he continued. "I demanded." "My parents stayed broken," Schmidt said, with a venom that let me know the drugs were the only thing making him talk. "They survived the Charleston massacre, and were empty shells of their former selves ever since. That's why I joined further." "See, that's exactly what I'm talking about. Though, why didn't they stop you?" His next words were chilling. "They tried, believe me." It took me a second to gather my thoughts after that. So how do we do it right, then? How do we break humanity in such a way that the children of the people we break don't rise up a generation later seeking revenge? Schmidt chuckled at this. "Human despots have been seeking the answer to that question for 10,000 years. They never found it." He had to be joking, and yet he couldn't be, on account of the drugs. "Then how did any empire survive on your planet?" I demanded. "Through unthinkable violence and tremendously bloated police and military budgets, and even then the empire that survived for more than a couple of centuries was rare indeed," Schmidt said. "Face it, what you want to do is impossible. No matter how badly you traumatize a generation, it won't change the fact that the next generation, by definition, wasn't there to experience it. They will see the pain and misery of their lives, and their parents' lives, and it will light a fire in them. And we have such a long history of insurgencies to draw upon. The Apaches, the Viet Cong, Insar Allah, And of course, we're learning from the prior generation's actions in this very conflict as well. In the immortal words of Ho Chi Minh, you can kill 10 of us for every one of you we kill, but in the end, you will tire of it first. I looked it up later, and honestly, he missed the best one. The Afghanistan prefecture has literally earned itself the epigraph of being the graveyard of empires. The Afghanis aren't exceptionally badass by human standards or anything, they just happen to be located in a mountainous region. That's also a crossroads between several rich regions, so empires tended to visit them quite frequently. I shuddered. I did not want to think about fighting humans in mountain ranges. I'd done so during the last uprising, and long story short, Idaho was now my own personal byword for hell. Lettergale continued his story. A white-hot anger filled me at this proclamation, and a need to retort, a need for him to be wrong. You better hope we find a way to control you, because if not, if we have to purge you like an infestation in order to have peace, we will. Yeah, we'll contain you. Locked in walled-off ghettos, and then we'll bomb you periodically to keep your population down to a manageable size. I stared at Lettergale in horror. It was the most horrid thing I could think of, he explained apologetically. He continued. And that will be the future of humanity, until you either learn to behave yourselves or go extinct, I finished. And then Schmidt just looked at me calmly and said, We called that one mowing the lawn. If any one thing can be said to what broke me, I think it's that. After all, it's not like I'm not well accustomed to human bravado by this point in my career. But I had invented the most horrible scenario I could think of in my head, and the humans already have a name for it. It really emphasizes this point, doesn't it? You just know it's been tried. You just know it didn't work. Anyway, we call that one mowing the lawn, he said. They tried that in the 20th and 21st centuries. The regimes responsible didn't survive to see the 22nd. Lettergale paused, staring into his drink again. He took another swig before continuing. How can you possibly think you'll win this? I asked. He said softly, In the 168 years since the conquest of Sol, there have been 13 major human uprisings. They've all failed. What makes you think the next one will work? That you will be the guys who succeed? Schmidt's answer began as a seeming non sequitur, which it couldn't have been, of course, on account of the drugs, but by the end of it, his words were permanently seared into my brain. I once saw a video, a truly ancient one. Could have been from all the way back in the 21st century for all I know, of stonecutters splitting a stone with hand tools. They drilled holes into the rock, and placed spikes in the holes, and then began hammering away at the spikes with sledgehammers. Hammer, 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 all up and down the line of spikes, with no apparent effect, until the whole rock split in half. I think of it often when I need inspiration. After all, do you really imagine it was the final blow alone that did it? The growth of your empire has stagnated. You conquered 10 systems in the 2 centuries before coming to Sol. You've conquered 1 since. The humans had a nasty habit of timing their uprising to coincide with when the Navy was busy with another war. And that's just the beginning. Even ignoring the price in lives of keeping Sol in your empire, you've extracted 31 trillion credits worth of value from Sol, while at the same time human terrorists have cost you 25 trillion in damages, and the occupation has cost you 11 trillion, between soldier salaries and the price of equipment. I looked it up later, and his numbers were more or less correct. Anyway. But it's even worse than that, Schmidt continued, because every factory that's making guns is a factory that isn't making video game consoles. Every factory that's making powered armor is a factory that isn't making cars. Every factory that's making warships is a factory that isn't making cargo ships. And of course, every soldier under arms is a citizen, who isn't working in an office or running a small business, or otherwise doing something, anything productive, in the most literal sense of the word. Hammer, 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 all up and down the line of spikes. Perhaps the next uprising won't be the one to do it, or the one after that, or even 10 more after that. But when it's all over, Sol will be free, and your empire will cease to exist in the form that it does now. I know that. Not believe, I know. For one simple reason. Because until Sol is free, it will never be over. Lettergale poured himself another drink, and downed half of it in one go, procrastinating in the telling of his story. If what you say is true, there's another way this can end, I pointed out. It can end in human extinction. I expected bravado. I'm accustomed to human bravado. Then we'll die as heroes, or we'll live on in legends that will never die, or something like that. I've heard that sort of thing 100, 1,000 times before. Schmidt answered me with something far worse than that. He answered with sarcasm. Oh, is that so? Golly, I never considered that before. Let me go rewrite human nature real quick. And, I mean, what could I possibly say in answer to that? He's dead now, of course, but his words haunt me like a vengeful spirit. And I told that whole story in order to say this. The more I think about it, the more I think he was right. The more I think that, in the history books of the far future, they will consider the conquest of Sol to be the beginning of the end for the Empire. We obviously can't let it go. Imagine what would happen if the other subject species learned they could go free simply by annoying us enough. They might not be genetically predisposed to be restive the way humans are, but with the threat of a good example, who knows what could happen? And yet, Sol is a bleeding wound in our side. The humans a poisoned pill that we're forced to swallow. In our arrogance, we came to Sol, to Earth, to the graveyard of empires. It might be time to start picking out a headstone. This was the last time I ever saw Yumgol Lettergale. He died in the uprising that began a week later, the last human uprising, and not because the humans went extinct, and certainly not because they decided to meekly start behaving themselves afterward. When a year had gone by and we hadn't been able to put it down yet, we became concerned. When 5 had gone by, and we lost effective control of half of the Earth, we began to be resigned. We continued to fight. What else could we do? But we knew we weren't going to win. 7 years into the war, 3 more subject species rebelled, and 2 species we'd repeatedly tried to conquer invaded. That was when the writing was really on the wall. Our forces were exhausted, utterly exhausted, and the situation had just gotten much worse. 10 years after the day of my final meeting with Yumgol Lettergale, the Empire was no more, fractured into a million pieces, and many of us, ironically, sought refuge among the humans. They, at least, would allow us to live as equals among them. Or at least those of us who hadn't committed any war crimes. Even those that had often preferred to do their time in a human jail rather than, say, a Krofnari work camp. It might seem strange that they be so merciful in victory when they were our bitterest threat while in bondage, but this too is attested to time and time again in their history. During every successful decolonization. And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense. Indeed, both behaviors stem from the same exact psychological phenomena. The human ability to recover from cultural trauma, and the deep-seated sense of justice felt by their oppressed. Or, to put it a bit more pretentiously, the indefatigable human spirit.